Welcome to In Focus with Ejaz Haider. Our top story tonight is about India-China tensions at the line of actual control. Troops from Chinese People's Liberation Army and the Indian Army remain nose to nose on the south bank of Pangong Tso, a high-altitude lake. According to Indian media reports, on the intervening night of 29th and 30th August, India launched a tactical operation to secure heights in the Kailash range opposite the Chushul Bowl. According to an assessment put out by a former general officer commanding Northern Command of India, none of these positions was physically held by the PLA. This is a frontage of about 30 kilometers. According to the former Indian general, Indian troops have secured all tactical heights on the Kailash range from the south bank of Pangong Tso to Sakala that include Helmet, Blacktop, Gurung Hill, Magar Hill, Mukpari, Rezangla and Rechenla. This area saw combat in India's defeat in 1962 when PLA troops secured the range and swooped down to the Chushul Bowl. As per the chronology of events, it seems that this tactical operation was conducted before a meeting between defense ministers of India and China last Friday. India's Defense Minister Rajnath Singh and China's General Wei Fenghe met on the sidelines of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization's Defense Chiefs Ministerial. This was the first high-level meet between the two sides since tensions began in May this year. On Monday, both sides accused each other of firing in the air, which has raised the temperature even further ahead of tomorrow's meeting between Indian Foreign Minister S. J. Shankar and China's State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi. The meeting will be held on the sidelines of the SCO's Foreign Ministers meeting and will be the first face-to-face between the two ministers since tensions began in May. To discuss this further, we are joined by General Waheed Arshad, former Chief of General Staff of Pakistan Army, Professor Victor Gao, Director of the China National Association of International Studies, and an Executive Director of Beijing Private Equity Association. We will also show the map of the area so that we can actually peg this discussion on what exactly is on the ground. But this is only the area of the South Bank. This is not the entire theater. So let me begin with Professor Gao here. Professor Gao, it seems that these peaks, these hill features have indeed now been occupied by the Indian Army troops. They were previously unoccupied because India, as per the Indian media reports, and also assessments by former Indian military officers, that India did not really want to provoke China. But now these features have been occupied. What do you think is likely to be China's response to this, and what are you looking at as far as tomorrow's meeting of the foreign ministers is concerned?
Well, thank you very much for having me. First of all, there is a lot of expectation for the foreign ministerial meeting between China and India tomorrow. I think the meeting will have great high stakes. War or peace probably will depend on the outcome of the meeting. Secondly, I think the whole world need to know that it is the Indian soldiers who have moved across the line of actual control and who have captured the surrounding mountain peaks around Banzhongguo Lake. And this is very dangerous. And I think the suspicion is that the Indian side has been using discussion as a excuse over the past several weeks or months to lay out stronger positions militarily vis-a-vis China. This is very dangerous. This is highly provocative. And I think this has the possibility of pushing the situation into war along China-Indian border. And I don't think this will help at all the Indian fundamental interest or the Chinese fundamental interest. So let's call upon India to stop such provocation and exercise rationality and sit down really and in real earnest to talk about peace, rather than using peaceful discussion as an excuse to capture more advantageous military positions, because otherwise the Indian side will suffer the consequences. I don't think the PLA is in any position afraid of a war with India, but I think PLA will not welcome war and will insist on peaceful dialogue with the Indian side. War, as far as China is concerned, will be only a last resort. And once war breaks out, China is not going to lose it. So let's be very clear about the stakes involved. We all need peace. We do not want to have any warmongering by each side or either side. Now is the moment for peace and development rather than for war between China and India.
Absolutely, Gao. As you know, you and I have been discussing this previously also on this program. So I'm aware of your insistence that this should be resolved peacefully. But there are a couple of issues here. One is that India says that even these hill features which have been occupied by the Indian troops are essentially their side of the line of actual control. So there is that issue. And secondly, the Indians claim that it is China which has been using the two tracks, the military track and the diplomatic track, talking to India while strengthening the PLA military positions along the entire theater. Now, these are obviously two positions that are mutually exclusive, you know, the Chinese position and the Indian position. So in that event, how do you think this is going to pan out? I mean, I've taken note of what you have said, but I still want to insist that if this does not get resolved, and you said a very interesting thing that tomorrow's meeting is going to decide war and peace. If this does not get resolved, how likely is a Chinese riposte?
Well, first of all, the current very dangerous situation is very much reminiscent of the situation in 1962 before the outbreak of war between China and India. The record is that the Indian side kept pushing, kept provoking. The Chinese side exercised a maximum restraint. And China insisted on peaceful discussion, and discussions were being violated and provided more excuse for the Indian side to move forward. And eventually, when China decided to fight back, it cannot stop until there is a complete and total victory. And I think this, again, plays out in very similar, dangerously similar fashion. Because if the Indian side keeps advancing across the line of actual control, capturing one mountain peak after another, there will be a limit to the Chinese patience. And the PLA will be fully prepared to strike back. And this will push the whole total length of China-Indian border into a war zone. And there will be no stop until the line of actual control will be fully restored. China is not in a position to suffer one provocation after another in this confrontation along the China-Indian line of actual control. And I hope the Indian side will really have second thought about keeping provocations and using peaceful discussion as an excuse for moving forward across the line of actual control or capturing mountain peaks as a threat to the Chinese side of the line of actual control. This probably will be one of the last warnings that China will ever give before the situation really gets out of control.
Right. Stay with me, Professor Gao. I also have some other questions for you, but let me pull in General Waheed Arshad. General Arshad, sir, you heard Professor Gao. You have probably also looked at the map that we displayed. Give me your reading of the situation, first purely from the military point of view, and then we'll sort of go into the broader political strategic aspect of it.
Yes, well, Ijaz, I think it's the move by the Indian forces. It's very obvious that they undertook a very surprise operation. Obviously, they achieved a lot of surprise. I think it's done through infiltration. They captured those tops and those commanding heights, as they say. But then the Chinese are also in various positions which are also commanding and sort of creating effects at a lot of places. And the operations carried out by the Indians is related to only this part of the overall theater, as you mentioned, because the theater is a very large swath of land, and the Chinese have actually occupied a lot of positions if you look at the theater in a very wholesome perspective. In my view, I think the Indian move has been to sort of gain advantage or to place itself in a better position now that the talks between the political interlocutors is going to take place. One meeting already took place, another is, as you say, scheduled tomorrow. So I think to gain more advantage in terms of bargaining, this operation was undertaken. Obviously, any action by the Indian troops, the Chinese have the flexibility and the liberty to respond. And I don't think, and I agree with Professor Gao when he says that it is difficult for China to accept, given the Indian intrusion, given the sensitivity of the whole issue in terms of the line of actual control, the issue of Tibet, the annexation of Ladakh, and so on and so forth. So, in my view, both countries may not be looking for war. Both countries would be looking to de-escalate, and the Indian move gives them a bargaining sort of leverage, although not very much, to perhaps convince the Chinese that let's restore status quo ante. Otherwise, the next step would obviously be taken by the Chinese. If they have to they gain better positions or to undo whatever tactical advantages the Indians have taken by securing those posts.
Well, one of the things that we have noted with reference to China's strategy is never to negotiate from a position of weakness. Now, I perfectly understand what you're saying with reference to the Indians taking these heights in order to strengthen the bargaining hand. But it does not seem to me, and I will, ask Professor Gao's view also on this, but it doesn't seem to me that China is going to accept negotiations with a weaker hand.
I fully agree. I mean, why should they do it? I go back to the overall, the whole position along the whole theater. I mean, it's not only related to this gap or, the lake, or the area opposite Chushul. I mean, it's the whole theater of operations if you look at it. So why would the Chinese agree to pull back from the positions which they had earlier occupied, and they had occupied based on their claims that the Indians are making moves to intrude across the line of actual control. So as per the Chinese, they are actually on their own land. And as per them, they have not violated the line of actual control. So I think it all boils down to why would the Chinese agree to pull back when their stance is that it's the Indians which actually forced them to undertake those moves to take over those positions initially. But looking at it from an Indian perspective, this is what the Indians could do. They could very well just sit back and let negotiations take place without actually having anything to show on ground. So I'll go back to now they have something to show on ground. And I think the Chinese will have to factor that in. Having said that, I still feel convinced that perhaps Chinese are not going to agree to a restoration of status quo ante only because the Indians have occupied these 5-6 positions. The Chinese have the option and the flexibility of not agreeing to them and then carrying out their own, incremental operations if they want, if they wish to, or they also have the option of doing something to make sure that the Indians vacate these positions.
Actually, just to get a sense of what the Indians are thinking, let me read out a short passage from this article that's been penned by, as I said, the former GOC&C Northern Command Lieutenant General H.S. Panag. He said there has been an error of judgment on our part. He's referring to having occupied the heights. We should have disregarded the LAC and secured the plateau-like areas to the east of some of the features secured by us to prevent the PLA from coming on to the equivalent or lower heights on the Kailash range east of the LAC to establish a firm base for counterattacks. And he's basically saying that his reading is that there is going to be a Chinese counterattack in this area. My own sense is that if I look at the theater, there are multiple other points where the PLA is operationally at an advantage. And I don't think that they would probably go head-on for these heights if they have the capacity and the superior strategic orientation in other areas. What do you think, General Arshad, sir?
Absolutely. I mean, I'll take you back. I'll take you to the line of control between India and Pakistan. You know, when there is a small tactical action or a violation somewhere, the response is not always at that same place. Depends on what the situation is, whether you can retake the area back or you have the opportunities of doing a similar thing or better in other areas. So similarly, as you're saying, the Chinese obviously has, and I also said that they have options in other areas. If they don't agree on the Indian contention, which I don't think they will, they have the option of incrementally moving forward or securing other positions that gives them much better advantage in other areas, which will again put pressure on the Indians to react. And then if the Indians do a counter move, so it will be a reaction, counter reaction. And it can go anywhere. I mean, the unintended consequences are not known to anybody at this point in time. So I think if tactically or militarily it may be disadvantageous for the Chinese to undertake small action operations on areas like tabletop and others because of the difficulty of the terrain, the logistic issues and all. They can always react in other places because
Absolutely.
if it's a game of finders keepers, then obviously the theater is large, and
Absolutely.
And the time and space is obviously favoring the Chinese because the Indians have mobilized in this sector. They have not mobilized as much in other sectors.
Correct.
So it all depends on whether the Indians insist that now that they have also occupied some positions, so it is better for the Chinese to go back. That will be, I think, in due disregard to the overall larger picture, which the Indians are trying to sort of, shy away from the larger theater operations, the larger political issue between the two countries in terms of annexation of Ladakh and the Chinese claims and their own claims. So I think this is a small part of reaction, counter-reaction. It may not lead to a total sort of restoration of status quo ante, given the presence of Chinese in more than 200 kilometers of area.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That was General Waheed Arshad speaking with us. Let me go back to Professor Gao. Professor Gao, you heard this. So there are a number of issues here also, but as you know, time is always short on television. But I wanted to ask you something which only someone like you can respond to, given the fact that you have seen China's own development, evolution of strategic thinking from from a ringside view. You were very close to the late Deng Xiaoping. You've seen the sort of, normalization with India. So give me a sense of, China's sort of investment into this relationship and now this bump. It must come as a disappointment to you, personally also.
Absolutely. I'm a big fan and a big supporter for greater friendship between China and India because I firmly believe that these two superpopulations have not only responsibilities for themselves, but also for world peace and development as a whole. Therefore, what's happening along China-Indian borders or line of actual control is not only worrisome, but also very, very unfortunate. I would say the Indian side is very much focused on the tactical advantages for itself. However, from the Chinese perspective, we emphasize both the strategic perspective as well as tactical perspective. And we do not want to have a war with India. And we do not want to fire the first shot. Now, what's troubling is that China and India, or between China and India, there are already live shots being fired. This is very dangerous. This broke the tradition for more than 4 decades. And I think we need to let the whole world know that the Indian side kept provoking, capturing one mountain peak after another, laying position as if they want to pounce on the Chinese side. This is very, very dangerous. But what it will trigger is that, according to the Chinese military philosophy, if you are the unjustified aggressor, then China has all the reason to fight back. And when it is fighting back, it is not just with regard to one mountain peak or another. I would say the total length of more than 3,000 kilometers of border between China and India will all be involved. And don't forget, the Ladakh region or the Bangunzhou region is only about several hundred away from the Indian capital city of New Delhi. This is very, very dangerous. If you are talking about a modern warfare between the two nuclear-powered countries with all the equipments very advanced, etc., you are talking about the possibility of the situation spilling out of control and spilling over to northern India very, very quickly, in days, I would say. Therefore, I think whoever on the Indian side who advised the government or the military to keep pushing forward to seek tactical advantages may run the risk of having a strategic routing as what happened in 1962. And this is really not a warning, just a very clear-minded reminder of what happened in 1962. We do not want to see a repetition of what happened in 1962. And I don't think whatever that happened in 1962, if repeated, will be in India's advantage at all. So let's stop playing with the fire. Let the Indian people enjoy peace and stability and calm, rather than being hijacked onto a war with China, which may have huge amount of casualties, huge amount of waste, and setting back China-India relations by decades.
Correct. Stay with me. Let me also pull in Michael Kugelman, who has joined me. Michael Kugelman is Deputy Director of the Asia Program and Senior Associate for South Asia at the Wilson Center in Washington, D.C. Michael, the situation seems to be getting out of control. The word that one is getting from the Indian side is that after having captured these heights, they're basically going gung-ho about this. On the Chinese side, it's very clear that if tomorrow's meeting between the two foreign ministers does not really break the ice or reach some kind of resolution, then we are looking at a Chinese riposte.
Well, I think that you hit on an important point, Dijaz. For me, what worries me the most right now about this crisis is that there's been a dialogue mechanism in place for a number of months, really since early June. The two sides have been meeting at very high levels for several months, and yet despite that, the situation has not eased. And I think that unfortunately the risk is that after a certain period of time, the two sides could conclude that these talks are not working. And if you conclude that the talks are not working, that's when you have to worry about what could come next. And to me, it seems like a situation where you have two governments that are hunkering down and that have no interest in backing down anytime soon. I don't think either side wants to be the one that makes the first move. I don't think either side is prepared to make the types of compromises that are needed to de-escalate. And I think a major reason for this is the horrific series of events that happened in June in the Galwan Valley when you had that brutal, deadly assault, which, as you well know, is so unusual along the LAC. And given the aftermath of that, the raw emotions, the anger, the mistrust emerging from that, it's going to take a whole lot, and it's going to take a long time to be in a position where both sides are willing to wind down. Now, I don't want to overstate the threat of a conflict or a war, But certainly we can't rule it out. And I guess what we have to hope is that with the weather turning difficult in the coming weeks in this area, that perhaps finally the two sides will conclude that they have to do whatever is necessary to wind down. But again, as I said before, when there's no incentive on either side to wind down anytime soon, that raises questions about what could be coming next.
Right. Michael, I want to get a sense from you, your personal assessment also, and generally the thinking inside the Beltway, with reference to the fact that Narendra Modi, who had essentially risen to the top on the basis of the development agenda, who also talked about a very robust and resilient and successful foreign policy, seems to have landed India into a corner, not just with reference to obviously Pakistan, which is a traditional sort of adversary, presumed to be a traditional adversary, but also Nepal, Bangladesh, China. So is there a sense in Washington that perhaps Mr. Modi needs to be engaged and told to sort of recast his foreign policy's approach to neighbors?
Well, certainly my own view is that, yes, Modi has found himself and found his country bogged down in his own neighborhood. And if you're a country that has great power aspirations, I think that it's important to be able to get your own neighborhood in order before you can think about projecting power in an effective way overseas. But that said, I think the view in Washington takes somewhat of a different perspective looking at the dispute with China right now. The sense is that India is clearly the victim and China is the aggressor, and that what this crisis in Ladakh shows us, according to the broader official perspective in Washington, is that the Indo-Pacific strategy that the Trump administration has come out with is the right thing, because there is a need to push back and try to find ways to counterbalance China's increasingly aggressive moves and actions in the broader Indo-Pacific region, not just. I
get that. Sorry, I'm pacing this up because I'm running very short of time. I get that. I mean, we've had these discussions before also, but this obviously sort of takes the U.S. out of the equation as an honest broker. Secondly, and very importantly, there is also, it seems to me that there is absolutely no recognition in Washington of the fact that India last year changed the status of an occupied land, whether it's the Jammu and Kashmir region, whether it's the Ladakh region, and annexed it. This is in violation of understandings with China also. This is in violation of, bilateral understandings with Pakistan, and also in violation of the UN Security Council resolutions. So perhaps Washington needs to begin to look at the issue anew and then decide who is the victim here.
So no, there is a recognition in Washington about the significance of the Article 370 repeal, and that could well have contributed to this current crisis between India and China. But I think that there's a wider approach that's taken as well that looks at the fact that China adapted a more muscular and uncompromising foreign policy some time ago before the Article 370 repeal, and explains why China has been engaging in particularly provocative moves, not only in Ladakh, but also in the South China Sea. So I think that the Article 370 move, and I believe this to be the case as well, is certainly one factor in why we're seeing this crisis now and why it's been playing out for so long. But it's only one of several factors, including one that relates to China's broader foreign policy.
I've got to stop here. Sorry, I've run out of time. Thank you so much. That was Michael Kugelman. Professor Gao, very quickly, I've actually extended time. You heard Michael Kugelman. It doesn't seem, the US seems to be sort of looking at a broader this thing and placing what's happening here, not within the framework of Indo-China thing, but in the framework of US-China relations.
Well, first of all, I think the Americans need to really talk about the truth and what's happening on the ground rather than turning a blind eye to the realities that are happening on the ground. Otherwise, you distort reality and you distort yourself. You distort what you stand for. That's the first point. If we are talking about China-Indian line of control disputes, for example, let's talk about it. And that's the first point. The second point is that I'm afraid the United States is very much behind the more jingoistic and warmongering position adopted by India in the recent years or so, because I think there are leaders in India who may feel emboldened by whatever they pick up from Washington, and they are probably going more and more extreme in confrontation against China. As I mentioned, China does not want to have a war or military conflict with India. But if someone creates that hostility, China will have
no option but to retaliate. Thank you so much. I'm very sorry, Professor Gao. I mean, there are a number of things that I wanted to discuss with you, but I've completely run out of time. Thank you so much. As always, a pleasure speaking with you. We shall take a short break and return to discuss the stumbling intra-Afghan peace process. Stay with us. Welcome back to In Focus. Our second story tonight is about Afghanistan's peace process and intra-Afghan talks. The Taliban have said that they are prepared to begin talks, but that is contingent upon the release of the remaining prisoners. The spokesperson for the Taliban's political office, Dr. Mohammad Naeem, said the release of some prisoners is still pending, which is being discussed. Both Kabul and the Taliban have already announced their negotiating teams for the talks. US Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad and the delegations are in Doha, where the negotiations will be held. Let's get right to the issue. We are joined by Dr. Jonathan Schroden, Director of CNS Center for Stability and Development, and Hamdullah Hamdard, a journalist based in Kabul. Let me begin with Dr. Schroden here. Dr. Schroden, frankly, I have now lost track of this prisoner issue. It's becoming confusing because, yes, it's going to happen. No, it's not going to happen. Yes, it's going to happen in these batches. No, XYZ is not going to be released. So give me some clarity on this.
Sure. Yeah, it has been quite a saga over the last number of months as to how this has unfolded. The demands of both sides have sort of continually shifted and changed over time, which has made this very, very difficult. It does feel, though, like we are in the home stretch of finally realizing, all of the demands that have been met by the various sides, which is to say the last remaining sticking point appears to be about a half a dozen prisoners that are accused of especially heinous crimes, to include a number of attacks against international forces in Afghanistan. For example, the German embassy bombing is one of the prisoners is responsible for that or was involved in that. And so there's particular political sensitivities associated with this set of individuals. And so what appears is in the works is that Afghanistan will likely release this group of men to Qatar to be held under some form of house arrest or at least state monitoring for the foreseeable future as a means of sort of ameliorating the concerns of countries like Germany, who have argued against the release of these particular individuals. So that seems to be the last remaining hurdle. It looks like that's going to be worked through in the next few days or week or so, which is why the negotiating teams, as you said, have traveled to Doha and are beginning preparations to start talks there. So it does look like after a number of months that we're in the home stretch of getting this done.
I'm happy to hear that this is going to be a home stretch because it's extremely important for the talks to begin. Afghanistan has a number of challenges to contend with. Let me pull in Mr. Hamdard here. Mr. Hamdard, Dr. Schroden is optimistic that despite the various snags that we have faced during this whole process, that this is going to be the home stretch. Would you agree with that? Do you share that optimism?
I personally believe that this agreement on some of the prisoners, which is happening right now, that will end very soon. And both Taliban and the Afghan government are struggling, or they're trying, and they're committed to start the intra-Afghan peace talks as soon as possible. Yes, I'm also optimistic in this regard, and I believe that the Afghan government has done a lot to make sure Taliban and the international community believe in their willingness towards the Afghan peace and towards the beginning of the intra-Afghan peace talks as soon as possible. And Taliban have also showed green signals. They're also ready for the intra-Afghan peace talks. Hopefully there will be the peace talks inauguration very soon. And the people of Afghanistan will finally witness Taliban sitting with the Afghan government and talking about the Afghan peace together. We hope that the problem of the disagreement that is still there between the Taliban and the Afghan government on some prisoner, that will be solved sooner.
That'll be solved sooner. That's very good news. I have two panelists. Both are optimistic that this is going to be, as Dr. Shorten put it, a home stretch. But Dr. Shorten, there's another issue that I want to get your view on. There is a sense that some elements within the Kabul government have been trying to delay this process. Unfortunately, and I'm sure you must have seen that tweet by Mr. Amrullah Saleh, the first vice president of Afghanistan, with reference to the Pakistan-Afghanistan border. As a matter of fact, he expressed very irredentist approach in that, and was publicly responded to by Ms. Alice Wells, who was formerly of the State Department. And then, of course, there's Hikmatyar's statement of a couple of weeks ago with reference to the Indian role. So give me a sense of the spoiler effect here, which could likely perhaps muddy the waters.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. There are so many moving pieces that are involved with these peace talks that you're right. There are any number of opportunities for people to play the role of spoiler as these talks are set to get underway, and frankly, they're likely to last for some time. I'm under no false aspirations that these talks will conclude with a comprehensive peace deal anytime in the near future. So there are a number of people and entities that could play the role of spoiler. That could be any of the regional countries. It could be any number of various individuals. It could be groups like ISIS in Afghanistan, for example. There are a lot of people and organizations and entities that have vested interest in the outcome of these talks and would like to steer them in one direction or another. And as the talks play out, you're going to see various, individuals, entities, states, et cetera, play a spoiling role at various times in order to try and get an outcome that is favorable for them, right? I mean, Afghanistan is really a linchpin in all of Central and South Asia. And so there are a lot of issues at play that a lot of people have vested interest in. And where those intersect, you're going to see friction as these talks unfold.
Absolutely. The best scenario, of course, and I'm sure you would agree with that, is a certain kind of agreement, a power sharing formula between the existing dispensation and the Taliban. And then, of course, a joint front against, the spoiler elements, especially terrorist groups like ISIS and other freelancers. Mr. Hamdard, I have constantly been insisting on a positive outcome for these talks, for the obvious reason that Afghanistan has seen too much bloodshed. The civilians have suffered so much by all sides, including the Taliban. But the fact is that the ISIS and certain other elements will continue to pose threat, and therefore it is even more important for these talks to go ahead and for all sides to find some kind of solution. So is this also a sense on the street in Kabul and in Afghanistan?
Well, as you know, and you might have witnessed that even today there was an explosion on Amrullah Saleh, the vice president of Afghanistan. All the Afghans want to stop these killings of the Afghans, and they are optimistic toward the Afghan peace talks. People are hopeful at the moment, but when they see the killings from both sides, then they lose a little bit of their hope, and they are worried about the peace talks, whether the peace talks will finally start or not. But still, they remain optimistic here in the city. However, today in Kabul, it's not a good day, unfortunately, and people are worried. There were explosions, there were casualties. Some of the military guards got injured, and the vehicles were damaged. And the city, the city is full of.
Must be in a lockdown. Areas must be under a lockdown. Yeah, I can understand what you're saying. I've actually witnessed one such day in Kabul myself, but thank you so much. That was Hamdullah Hamdard speaking with us. Dr. Shorten, before I wrap up this segment, there is also the element of China. China has been speaking with the Taliban, with the Kabul government quietly, as you know, for some years now. They're also thinking in terms of infrastructure development in Afghanistan. As part of the overall BRI vision that they have. They already have a CPEC agreement with Pakistan. They're pulling in Iran into a 25-year sort of development framework with the quid pro quos, obviously. So Afghanistan, obviously, geographically becomes important for Beijing. It seems to me that Beijing is prepared to play a positive role in Afghanistan. Do you think that could have a salutary impact on these talks and the outcome?
I do. China has been playing, I think, a helpful role with respect to Afghanistan in recent years. And the U.S., interestingly, has been encouraging that. As heated as the rhetoric has gotten between the U.S. and China, generally speaking, in regards to, the actions of both states economically and in some ways militaristically, Afghanistan is one of those areas where U.S. and Chinese interests actually align fairly strongly. And so the U.S. has been encouraging China to play a more active role with respect to encouraging the Taliban to, negotiate and participate in various ways. And China has been playing that role, both directly in terms of meeting with the Taliban, encouraging them to take various, positions with respect to the talks in the Afghan government. But also, I think they've been actively involved with the Pakistani government as well, yes, in terms of encouraging them to use what auspices they have to encourage the Taliban to participate in the talks and engage in certain ways as well. So China has, I would say, been playing a helpful role. I hope that continues. I hope that, the broader sort of souring of relations between the U.S. and China in recent years doesn't spill over into Afghanistan, because that is an area where the U.S. and China, frankly, don't need to compete. There's not really any reason for that. It would be disadvantageous for the Afghan populace if that became the situation. And so I'm hopeful that the U.S. and China can see their common interests there and continue to work collaboratively to pursue them.
I agree with you, and I think that's going to happen because China and Pakistan are also very strongly wedded to the idea of a peaceful Afghanistan, and they really want these talks to go through and for all sides to get to some kind of settlement. But thank you so much, Dr. Jonathan Shorten. Pleasure, as always, talking with you. This is all from In Focus this week. We shall see you next Monday. Keep following our latest updates on social media at indus.news. Good night and goodbye.